Welcome to the video. Today I want to talk to you about an interesting historical case coming out of Texas, but concerning the wartime occupation of Greece by the Axis forces, that is Nazi Germany, fascist Italy, and fascist Bulgaria. In the spring of 1941, those three countries invaded Greece, partitioned it. Quickly, the system over there devolved into essentially agriculture, food supplies, and medicine were being looted by the Nazi and fascist forces. The British imposed a blockade upon Greek ports so as to hinder the fascists' ability to use Greece as a port in their operations in the Mediterranean and as a port toward their operations in North Africa, for example, the North Africa campaign, Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, whatnot. So this case, known as Batsakis versus Demotsis, comes from Texas. It comes from after the war, right? And here's what's very important about it. It really centers around the adequacy of consideration in a contract, right? So what is consideration? Kind of sounds like a nebulous thing, right? Consideration is something of value. It is one of the four essential elements of contract, of a valid contract. Those four essential elements essentially are legal capacity of the parties, age of majority, someone's at least 18 years of age or older, depending on the jurisdiction, right? Mental competency. Or if they're like an emancipated minor, say like they're 17 and they join the military, or they're registered to vote or whatever, or they're like a child actor, right? That kind of situation. There's mutual consent, meaning that there's a meeting of the minds or offer and acceptance. A lawful object, there can't be like an illegal contract that can't be enforceable. Say, I pay you $3,000 to push dope to babysitters and architects, right? So that's, law doesn't allow that. So the fourth element of a contract is consideration, something of value, right? Exchanged. So that could be, usually it's money, love and affection, or like like-kind kind of things, trades. So to set the stage here, in April 1942, so let's go back 1 year actually, April 1941, or spring 1941. The Italians invade Greece from their protectorate in what is today modern-day Albania, right? They asked for Hitler's help. Hitler helps Bulgaria, that had designs on northern Greece, the northern Aegean part of Greece, like the Macedonian and Thracian, or western Thracian parts of Greece. So these three countries essentially rip the country apart, have different zones of occupation, right? Then it devolves into a partisan war where Greek patriots are fighting against these fascist forces and whatnot. And then there's, of course, reprisals by the fascists. There's a sequestration of the food resources in the country, right? Agriculture breaks down, medicine breaks down, all that shit. So within this, a black market arrives, or pops up, right? To basically feed people. Within this, a year later, in 1942, George Batsakis and Eugenia Demotsis enter into a contract whereby George Batsakis gives 500 drachma, the Greek money at the time, 500,000 drachma to Eugenia Batsakis, in exchange for Eugenia Batsakis giving Eugenia Demotsis, to George Batsakis, giving $2,000 from April 2nd, 1942, with 8% interest per year until the debt is paid off, right? Now, you have to think, with inflation, the 500,000 drachma that Demotsis received from Batsakis had a value of $25, right? So she's paying $2,000 with 8% annual interest in the future. after the war or before, as was stipulated in the contract. There'll be more information in the links to this video. But essentially, she's getting $25 and she has to pay over $2,000 plus 8% annual interest, right? Sounds like a shitty deal, right? So, moving forward, in 1950s, I'm blanking on the exact date when it was, Batsakis sues Demotsis in Texas, in a Texas trial court, right? He wins. But instead of getting $2,000, the court finds that Demotsis owes Batsakis $750 at 8% annual APR, right? Interest per year. Batsakis is not satisfied with this. He appeals to the appellate level court of Texas, the second court before the Supreme Court usually, and that's how it is in Texas, the court structure. So the Texas Court of Appeals fines for Batsakis, and it says basically that without evidence of fraud, duress, or misrepresentation, the court is unwilling to void a contract merely for the insufficiency of consideration, right? The consideration to the contract being that there's something of value, right? Batsakis was going to give $2,000 plus 8% annual interest for receiving the equivalent of 25 American dollars and 500,000 drachma, right? So the court said, well, we changed the decision of the $750 that the trial court gave you to $2,000 with 8% annual interest for the paying off of the $2,000, but because, you know, this is drawn into the 50s after the war, a decade after, there's going to be, of course, more interest, right, from April 2nd, 1942. So the court says, the Texas Court of Appeals says, you have to pay off to Demotsis, they mentioned, you have to pay off the $2,000 as laid out in the contract at 8% annual annual interest. But whatever balance is after that, after the 2,000 has been paid off at that interest rate, the remaining interest is at 6%. So that's kind of like throwing a bone to Demotsis, the original defendant in this case. So this case is really interesting because it happened in a place where there's such, like, you know, suffering and, like, you know, the Nazi war machine tearing Greece apart, and upwards of maybe 300,000, 500,000 dead in a span of about 2 to 3 years or so, starting 1941, and this eventually leading into the Greek Civil War of the late 1940s, following the Second World War. So you have to think that, you know, if you read like Mark Mazauer's books on Nazi-occupied Greece, he makes a really good point of showing just how brutal the Nazi occupation was and how the country just devolved out of what happened. So I really want to make that video for this video for that reason, to show that, yeah, it's a contract issue. It's an issue of the consideration, you know, the inadequacy of the consideration is not really in the purview of the court. They don't really care about it. But it's just like, you know, adding the human element of, like, you know, how could you enforce a contract for such a thing when this hyperinflation is happening? People are starving to death, literally. People are going through trash cans to look for food, you know. People are cooking their dogs in many cases for, you know, just sustenance. So I think for that reason, this video had to be made, you know, just kind of shed some light on what in Greek history, this period of Greek history, is known as the Great Famine. Thank you so much. Please like, comment, subscribe, share, leave any kind of helpful, constructive criticism or anything else, you know, which feel free. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.